Welcome to Einstein Rift. Tonight, you won't just learn what happened behind the paper walls of old Japan. You'll feel it. You'll smell the perfume that covered decay, hear the sandals that never echoed, and wonder how much a girl had to lose to become desirable. This is not a fantasy. This is how they lived, and how they were never allowed to live. In the 17th century pleasure districts of Edo, Japan, no girl arrived by choice. She arrived by price, sold by desperate families, orphanages, or even temples. Girls as young as 6 were purchased into a decades-long contract, though they didn't call it that. They called it adoption. But there were no lullabies, only ritual. Before a girl was allowed to step foot into Yoshiwara, the famed licensed quarter of Edo, she was washed. Not bathed, washed. The process took hours. Her hair was soaked in lye. Her body scrubbed with rough cloths until the skin flaked off like dry leaves. Her fingernails were trimmed to the base. She was given a name, not hers, but one suited for her status. Usually after flowers, or seasons, never after anything that bled. Her first night was spent inside the nameless room, a chamber with no windows, where she fasted, kneeling on raw straw, breathing in incense made of dried fruit and ash. Elders called it cleansing the past. In truth, it broke her sense of time. At dawn, she was brought before the older courtesans and silently inspected. They pinched her cheeks, measured the curve of her ankles, checked for teeth. Then came the ink. A small mark was tattooed behind her left ear. A house sigil, tiny but permanent. If she ran, it identified her. If she died, it branded her. She wasn't allowed to speak for the first month, only to listen. She listened to lessons, how to walk without sound, how to bow in precise angles, how to fold a kimono without creasing the outer silk. She listened to stories of the one who disobeyed, always ending in illness, madness, or fire. If she cried, she was not punished, only laughed at. The older women called it the leaking season. If she refused to eat, they fed her rice soaked in red sake. If she refused to sleep, she was given tea laced with poppy milk. Everyone sleeps eventually, they said. Better if it's with dreams. At night, the girls were made to sit before a mirror and smile, for hours, until their faces forgot how to be neutral. A courtesan, they were told, does not rest her face, she rests her soul. One of the girls, they called her Aya, asked if she could see her mother. She never asked again. The next morning, she returned with her hair cut short and her voice hoarse. The lesson was clear. Some memories were not allowed inside the gates. The hierarchy inside Yoshiwara was strict. She began as a kamuro, an attendant, a shadow. She dressed the senior courtesans, fetched water, prepared oils. She was not allowed outside, not even to touch soil. Your feet are now property, they told her. Keep them clean. After 2 years, she was promoted to hikomi, the stage before her body became currency. Here, she was trained in dance, poetry, conversation, and fragrance. She practiced how to pour tea with elegance, how to laugh without showing teeth, how to cry while still looking beautiful. But still, she had no right to say no. On her 15th birthday, she was given a silk robe and a room with a paper door. That night, a client came. No words were exchanged, just coin and scent and ritual. If the client left satisfied, her name would be added to the ledger. If not, she would be subject to cleansing, a quiet punishment that might mean kneeling on salt or having her food rationed, or worse, silence from the elders. And if a client died in her presence, not unheard of, especially among wealthy, sickly men, she was expected to sit beside the body until the priest arrived. She was not allowed to scream. she was not allowed to leave. "You opened his final gate," they would say. "Now you must close it." By the end of her first year in service, she no longer used her name, not even in her thoughts. Her dreams were filled with scents, not words. Her hands twitched at night, mimicking the bows she practiced 1,000 times, and her smile never faded, even in sleep. Because by then, she wasn't a person. She was a mirror, a painted surface, a perfect lie, built to make others forget their own ugliness by feeding on hers. There were 136 rules, not written, not posted, memorized, implied, enforced. They governed everything: how to bow depending on the client's footwear, how many times to nod before serving tea, how to cry without making sound, and how to laugh without actually meaning it. Even breathing had expectations. Inhale through the right nostril during apologies. Exhale fully before you speak of dreams. Breaking these rules didn't lead to warning. It led to ritual correction. If a girl looked away too early from a nobleman's eyes, she was forced to kneel in ice water while reciting a poem about loyalty. If she smiled too wide, she wore a wooden grin cage for an hour, a vice that stretched her lips until the muscles burned. It was called training the mask. Clients came in many forms: drunk, gentle, cruel, dying. The girls were taught never to react, even when slapped, even when asked to speak in voices of dead loved ones, even when asked to bleed a little, for realism. Every spring, the district held a private event called the Parade of the Unflowered. Girls who had served 3 years without earning a full client rank were dressed in pale white, lips unpainted, and made to walk silently past the most powerful patrons. They were not allowed to look up. If a patron stopped one, she might be elevated. If none stopped, she'd be assigned to the low house, where clients paid with coins instead of silver. In the low house, time was measured by candles. 1 stick meant 10 minutes. A girl was expected to serve 6 candles a night, minimum. If she failed, her supper was cut in half. If she exceeded it, she earned the right to warm water for washing, nothing more. There was no solidarity. Competition was encouraged. Whispers about ugly shoulders or sour perfume were quietly passed between girls like needles beneath a pillow. Betrayal was survival. But above them all stood the tayu, the grand courtesans, dressed in layers of silk so heavy they needed 2 girls to help them walk. They rarely spoke. Their presence alone was worth more than a farmer's lifetime earnings. But they too followed rules. If a tayu was caught favoring a client, she was stripped of rank and paraded through the garden in daylight, face painted like a demon. Clients were invited to throw petals or stones. Some clients requested silence, others requested storytelling, tales of rivers haunted by lost lovers or flowers that only bloomed in fire. The girls became masters of metaphor. When a man wanted to feel powerful, they called him a storm. When he wanted to be forgiven, they called him winter melting. When he wanted to forget who he was, they became rain, falling without memory. One girl, named Fuyu, Winter, was known for her stillness. Her body never twitched, her voice never cracked. But one night, a samurai client requested her. A man with half a face and a scar that whispered down his neck like a secret he could never speak. She served him tea, bowed, lit incense, but her eyes lingered 1 second too long on his scar. That night, she was taken to the shadow room, a place without light, without sound. She returned the next morning with a new name and a slower walk. No one asked what had happened. No one mentioned her old name again. In the ledger, Fuyu was crossed out, replaced with no season. To be seasonless meant to exist without favor, to serve any client, at any time, without preparation. She became the girl of last resort, the one brought to fulfill requests no one else would. Every evening, the girls performed the mirror ritual before opening the shoji screens. They would stand before the full-length bronze mirror, apply red to their lips, and say one thing they hated about themselves, aloud, into the glass. This was said to keep the ego clean. And it worked. Because over time, they no longer hated themselves. They simply forgot who they were. By the end of their second year, most girls could smile for 5 straight hours without blinking. They could drink sake without tasting it. They could fake a laugh that made dying men believe they were young again. But they could no longer weep. Not because they weren't sad, but because the body forgets how to make tears when the soul isn't invited. By the 3rd year, the body was no longer a thing of desire. It was a ledger, a sum of services ranked by age, condition, and repeat visits. Girls learned to read themselves like merchants read cloth, for wear, for stain, for rot. There were no rest days, no true illness. Blood was not an excuse. When it came, and it always did, it was dealt with silently. Cotton wadding, perfumed cloth, and extra incense. The clients were warned only if they asked. Most didn't. On busy nights, a girl might serve 6 men, sometimes more. Not always fully, sometimes just to lie beside them, to be wept on, to be called someone else's name. But even that took something, and that something didn't grow back. Those who fell ill were hidden, moved to the Moon House, a detached building near the back gate. No one entered without permission. Those who did came out quiet, pale, changed. Some girls returned, most didn't. The Moon House was not a place for healing, it was a place for containment. When a girl showed signs of wasting, thin limbs, night fevers, persistent cough, she was sent there. Given concoctions of mercury, sulfur, and crushed seashells. They called it silver breath. They said it drove out demons. But the girls who drank it began to twitch. Their fingers turned stiff. Their skin flaked like candle wax. One girl, called Hina, was once so beloved she had 6 regular clients and a waiting list. When her teeth began falling out, they assigned her to incense grinding. After a month, she stopped speaking. One day, she walked into the kitchen and pressed her face to the coals. She didn't scream, just fell. They held a ceremony, not to honor her, but to cleanse the tools she had touched. Girls who became pregnant, and it happened often, were dealt with quietly. If a client demanded his seed continue, the child might be spared. But most of the time, it wasn't even discussed. On the 3rd day of missed blood, the girl was given moon tea, brewed with bitter herbs and heated stones. If she resisted, she was placed on the red mat. There, the elder midwife would press hot stones to her abdomen while reciting an old poem backwards. It wasn't medical, it was ritual, and the pain was considered part of the penance. Afterward, she would be given a new obi, a red one, not scarlet, not crimson, just red. It meant still fertile. But everyone knew what it really meant. Some girls, when broken beyond repair, were used in the lantern ceremony, a secret rite performed on nights with no moon. Their bodies, wrapped in white, were sat upright and dressed, hair combed, lips painted, incense placed between their toes. Then they were brought to the path of returning, a narrow hall where new girls walked on their first day. The dead were placed at the end, under a veil, surrounded by lanterns. The new girls were told to bow. They weren't told why. The idea was that the soul of the dead would pass its beauty, its endurance, its memory, into the living. But some said the soul passed its sorrow instead. Those who disappeared without death were listed as lost to air. That was the official term. But the girls whispered another name, wind dolls, because sometimes a girl would vanish. Her room cleaned, her bedding burned, no trace. And yet, some nights, the other girls would hear footsteps in the hallway, too soft to be guards, too light to be real. They said the wind dolls came back, not to haunt, but to remind the living what they were becoming. By the 4th year, the body no longer resisted. Even pain became familiar. Girls stopped flinching. Their hands never trembled. Their lips never cracked. They still looked human. But something behind the eyes was gone. Not dead, just replaced. In Yoshiwara, freedom was spoken of like the moon, distant, visible, untouchable. Technically possible, practically forbidden. They said a girl could buy her way out, that if she pleased enough noblemen, earned enough silver, served enough seasons without incident, she might one day wear a red kimono with no price tag. A free woman. But no one could name a girl who ever did. The rules said redemption cost 30 gold coins, but the body rarely lasted long enough to generate that. Not after the infections, the burns, the forced cleansings with lye and crushed coral powder. Not after what they called deep serving, 3 nights in a row without sleep, meant to accommodate traveling clients. Not after the winter coughs and the weight loss and the red boils that made men request new names. Some tried to fake their way out. One girl sewed her own fingers together with thread, hoping to convince the elders she'd gone mad. They called it the needle trick. She was reassigned to the fever wing, where girls too sick to serve were sent to perform housekeeping, until they collapsed. If they could no longer stand, they were cremated that same night, wrapped in scrap fabric and tied with fishing twine. There were those who ran, always in twos. It was believed that escape required a witness, someone to swear that it happened. But the district was walled on all sides, ringed with guards, lit with red lanterns every 10 steps. Anyone caught was returned barefoot, silent, and with a new name. Not a flattering one. Names like Dust, Hollow, No More. These girls were never seen again in the common rooms, only in the reflections. There was a ceremony called the Path of Lanterns, a corridor lit entirely by paper lamps painted with girls' names. Each lamp represented one who had served 5 full years without rebellion. When the paper yellowed, the name was retired. When the string broke, the lamp was burned. No one replaced it. One girl, known as Ko, had once been the most requested courtesan in her house. Her hair reached her knees. Her voice was soft enough to hush newborns. Her silence made men weep. Then one day she simply stopped speaking, not in protest, not in defiance, just because there was nothing left to say. She sat in the corner of the tea room for 8 days, untouched, unsummoned. The clients ignored her. The other girls stepped around her like furniture. On the 9th night, her seat was empty. Her room was scrubbed, her kimono burned. No one asked where she went. The house mistress simply said, she returned to the dust. As girls aged, and in this place, aging meant reaching 20, they were moved to the still hall, a building with no mirrors, no windows, no voices. There, they were dressed each morning and made to sit on mats behind silk curtains. Clients were allowed to watch, not touch. Some found this merciful. Others saw it as the final stage of erasure. A living doll, stripped of purpose, displayed like a warning. There were rituals even in death. The ash doll procession happened quietly, usually before dawn. When a girl died, usually from disease, sometimes from collapse, occasionally by her own hand, her body was washed, perfumed, dressed in her best robe, and posed in a seated position. Her mouth was sewn shut with gold thread, not for beauty, for silence. Her name was spoken once by the head priest, then written on a slip of paper and tucked beneath her tongue. After cremation, the paper was removed from the ashes and burned again, separately. Why? Because even the idea of her had to be erased. There was a book kept in the shrine, bound in black lacquer, with pages made of pressed linen. It was called the Ledger of the Fated. Each page listed the house name, the service years, and a single word to define how she ended. Words like bled, fell, withered, burned, vanished. No explanations, no stories, just categories. And yet, late at night, the girls whispered stories anyway. Of those who chose silence over service. Of those who jumped from rooftops and landed with their hair still perfect. Of those who looked into the mirror one last time and no longer saw a face, only a role. They said some girls had no names at all, that they were born in Yoshiwara, died there, and never once heard the sound of their true identity. By the 7th year, a girl could walk across a wooden floor without making a sound. She could change expression mid-sentence, cry on command, flirt without interest, touch without warmth, and serve without being present. She was everything a client wanted, and nothing she ever was. Because in Yoshiwara, the final transformation wasn't death. It was becoming useful without identity. A body that breathed, a name that sold, a soul that had no place to return to. Not ghost, not human, just inventory. And like all inventory, she was counted, used, replaced, then forgotten.